March 10, 1945. 2 a.m. Nyanbashi District, Tokyo. The pencil shook violently in the emergency coordinator's hand as he attempted to write in the district log book, recording words that would haunt survivors for generations. The rain is on fire. The very air we breathe has become flame. Through the emergency station window, he witnessed something that defied 4 years of Japanese military propaganda. Glowing embers fell from American B-29 bombers like snow, each one blossoming into pools of liquid fire that flowed across streets, climbed walls, and leaped between buildings with supernatural persistence. The napalm-filled M69 incendiary bombs were creating temperatures of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to boil canal water and create their own weather systems. In the Shitamachi district, where over 1 million people lived in wood and paper houses packed at 103,000 per square mile, the Americans had just unleashed what would become history's deadliest air raid. 279 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses from a force of 325 that launched, stripped of their defensive guns to carry maximum bomb loads, were dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries containing 500,000 individual M69 bomblets onto a 3-by-4-mile rectangle of Tokyo. The entire population of Japan's capital had been assured by their government that American bombers could never reach them, that even if they did, Tokyo's firefighting brigades could handle any threat. What none of them knew was that this moment would trigger the most profound psychological transformation in Japanese history, a systematic demolition of everything they believed about American capabilities, their own invincibility, and the very nature of modern warfare. The mathematics of Japan's destruction were being written not in military defeats on distant islands, but in rivers of liquid fire flowing through the streets of their capital, in temperatures that turned human bodies to ash in seconds, and in production statistics from American factories that would soon reveal the true hopelessness of their cause. The collapse had begun months earlier, though few in Japan recognized it. By late 1944, the B-29 Superfortress had become operational from bases in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, captured after brutal fighting that summer. These islands, just 1,500 miles from Tokyo, brought Japan's home islands within range of America's newest and most advanced bomber. Among those preparing for the coming storm was Major General Curtis LeMay, who assumed command of the 21st Bomber Command on January 20, 1945. A veteran of the European bombing campaign, LeMay inherited a precision bombing operation that was failing spectacularly. High-altitude bombing from 30,000 feet had achieved less than 5% accuracy due to a meteorological phenomenon the Americans had just discovered, the jet stream, with winds reaching 250 miles per hour that scattered bombs miles from their targets. The B-29s themselves, technological marvels that each cost $639,000, equivalent to $11 million today, were suffering chronic engine failures at high altitude. The Wright R-3350 engines, the most powerful aircraft engines ever mass-produced, had a disturbing tendency to catch fire during the long climbs to bombing altitude. By January 1945, more B-29s had been lost to mechanical failures than to enemy action. But the first real shock to Japanese assumptions came from an unexpected source: American chemistry. At Harvard University, a team led by Dr. Louis Fieser had been working since 1942 on a problem specifically designed for Japan. They knew that 90% of Tokyo's buildings were constructed of wood, bamboo, and paper. Traditional incendiary bombs filled with magnesium or thermite burned intensely but briefly. What Fieser created was something entirely different: a sticky, jellied gasoline that would adhere to any surface and burn for up to 30 minutes. The formula was deceptively simple: aluminum salts of naphthenic acid and palmitic acid mixed with gasoline. They called it napalm, from the first syllables of naphthenic and palmitic acid. When Fieser completed the formula on February 14, 1942, he had created what would become one of the most feared weapons of the 20th century. Standard Oil Development Company, working with the Office of Scientific Research and Development, had actually begun developing the M69 delivery system in October 1941, 2 months before Pearl Harbor, suggesting American war planners had long anticipated the need to burn Japanese cities. The revelation of American capabilities began not over Japan, but in the Utah desert. At Dugway Proving Ground, the U.S. Army had constructed exact replicas of Japanese neighborhoods, complete with tatami mat floors, sliding paper doors, and the precise wood used in Japanese construction. German architect Erich Mendelsohn, a Jewish refugee, had been hired to ensure every detail was accurate. The tests conducted throughout 1943 produced data that would have terrified Japanese leadership had they known. A single M69 incendiary cluster weighing just 500 pounds could reliably start fires across a 2,500 square foot area. The napalm gel would splatter on impact, throwing burning globs up to 100 feet. Most critically, water would not extinguish it. The burning gel would simply float on water and continue burning, making traditional Japanese firefighting methods useless. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McNamara, then a statistical analyst for the Army Air Forces, calculated that 68 Japanese cities could be completely destroyed with the B-29 force available. His analysis, presented to LeMay in February 1945, showed that switching from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude incendiary attacks could increase destruction efficiency by 500%. The Japanese, meanwhile, remained dangerously ignorant of these preparations. Colonel Shigeo Nakajima, head of Tokyo's air defense, would later admit, "We believe the Americans would continue high-altitude daylight precision bombing as they had in Europe. The possibility of low-altitude night incendiary raids was never seriously considered." February 25, 1945, Tokyo. The first major incendiary test arrived without warning. 231 B-29s dropped 453 tons of incendiaries on a 1 square mile section of Tokyo, destroying 28,000 buildings and killing 3,000 people. This was merely LeMay's experiment, testing whether Japanese air defenses could handle low-altitude attacks. Police photographer Koyo Ishikawa, documenting the damage the next morning, noticed something unprecedented. The fires had not simply burned buildings, they had created their own wind systems. Immense incandescent vortices rose in several places, he recorded, sucking whole blocks of houses into a maelstrom of fire. The Japanese military response revealed fatal misconceptions. General Masakazu Kawabe, deputy chief of the Army General Staff, dismissed the raid as harassment. He assured Emperor Hirohito that Tokyo's 8,000 firefighters, organized into neighborhood brigades, could handle any American incendiary attack. The government distributed wooden buckets and sand to civilians, conducting daily drills where housewives practiced beating out flames with wet mops. But nothing prepared them for the intelligence network that guided American targeting. Japanese Americans recruited from internment camps were translating captured documents, identifying industrial targets dispersed among residential areas. Sergeant Ben Kuroki, who flew 58 combat missions despite his family being interned, later revealed, "We knew exactly where every small factory was hidden, every workshop in someone's home. The Japanese thought dispersal would protect their industry. Instead, it gave LeMay the justification to burn entire cities." March 9, 1945. 5:35 p.m. Guam's North Field. The first B-29, nicknamed Dauntless Dottie, began its takeoff roll. Over the next 2 hours and 45 minutes, 325 superfortresses would launch from 3 islands, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, converging on Tokyo in the largest raid ever assembled. LeMay had made 3 radical decisions that transformed the mission. First, all defensive guns except tail positions were removed, along with their gunners and ammunition. Second, the bombers would attack at night between 5,000 and 7,000 feet, below effective radar detection and heavy anti-aircraft guns. Third, each plane would carry 40 cluster bombs containing 1,520 individual M69 incendiary bomblets, double the normal bomb load. The lead Pathfinder aircraft, arriving over Tokyo at 12:08 a.m. on March 10, marked the target area with napalm bombs and a giant flaming X. The main force followed, dropping their incendiaries in a calculated pattern designed to create a ring of fire that would trap residents inside. Tail Gunner Sergeant James Kerr watched the first bomb's impact. At first, it looked like silver snow falling, he recalled. Then each one erupted into a pool of fire about 10 feet across. Within minutes, thousands of these pools merged into rivers of fire flowing through the streets. The weather conditions, 45 to 67 miles per hour surface winds from the southwest, proved catastrophic for Tokyo's residents. These natural winds, combined with the firestorm's convection currents, created what pilots described as solid sheets of flame leaping 300 feet into the air. As the bombers passed over Tokyo Bay, their crews witnessed something that defied their understanding of physics. The fires were creating their own weather system, a phenomenon scientists would later term a firestorm. Superheated air rose so violently that it created hurricane-force winds at ground level, sucking oxygen from shelters and feeding the flames with fresh air. B-29 pilot Robert Morgan, who had previously flown the famous Memphis Belle in Europe, recorded, "At 5,000 feet, the thermal updrafts were so violent they threw our 140,000-pound bomber around like a leaf. The turbulence was worse than any anti-aircraft fire I experienced over Germany." The target area, the Shitamachi district, contained not only dense residential housing but also thousands of small workshops that produced components for Japan's war industry. The government had deliberately dispersed production after the 1942 Doolittle raid, believing this would protect it from American bombing. Instead, this dispersion gave LeMay the rationale to target entire residential districts. Radio Operator Staff Sergeant Carl Barold monitored Japanese civilian defense frequencies. At first, there was organized chatter, fire brigades coordinating responses. Within 30 minutes, it turned to panic, then screaming, then silence. One by one, the radio stations went dead. The firestorm's intensity exceeded all predictions. Temperatures reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit in the fire's core, hot enough to melt glass and aluminum. The Sumida River, which residents fled to for safety, began to boil. Asphalt streets liquefied, trapping those attempting to flee. By 2:30 a.m., 2.5 hours into the raid, the destruction had achieved a scale that shattered Japanese understanding of warfare. Police records later documented attempts to coordinate evacuation that revealed the complete inadequacy of preparations. One district commander reported, "We had drilled for conventional fires that spread building to building. This was different. The fire was everywhere simultaneously. It fell from the sky, flowed through streets like water, jumped across fire reeks we thought were impossible." The most devastating blow to Japanese assumptions came from the behavior of the M69 bomblets themselves. Each one upon impact shot burning napalm up to 100 feet horizontally, coating everything in sticky fire that water couldn't extinguish. Firefighters watched in horror as their hoses merely spread the burning gel. Dr. Kubota Shigenori, head of a rescue squad, recorded observations that challenged basic physics as Japanese understood it. The heat was so intense that people burst into flames without being touched by fire. Their clothes would suddenly ignite from radiant heat. We saw families fleeing thinking they had escaped only to combust spontaneously 50 m from the flames. The American bombers meanwhile experienced their own revelation. Bombardier Lieutenant John Sauer watched his instruments. The thermal column was so powerful it registered on our altimeter. We were supposedly at 5,000 feet, but the heat was pushing us up to 7,000, even 8,000 feet. The entire city had become a blast furnace. As dawn broke on March 10th, the scale of destruction defied comprehension. Reconnaissance photos taken by F-13 aircraft, modified B-29s, showed 15.8 square miles of Tokyo had been incinerated. The images revealed something that stunned American photo interpreters. Entire districts had simply vanished, not damaged, not burned, but completely erased from existence. Japanese police reports captured after the war documented the immediate toll. 83,793 confirmed dead, though authorities admitted many bodies had been completely consumed by fire. 267,171 buildings destroyed, over 1 million homeless. But these statistics failed to capture the psychological impact. 16-year-old Tsuchiya Masako, who survived by submerging herself in a water tank until the fire passed, emerged to find her entire neighborhood gone. There were no landmarks, no streets, just gray ash as far as I could see. I couldn't find where my house had been. Everyone I knew was dead or missing. The breakdown of civil authority was immediate and complete. Tokyo's fire department, which had confidently assured citizens they could handle any air raid, ceased to exist as an organized force within 2 hours. Of 8,000 firefighters, over 1,000 died in the first night, with hundreds more severely burned. Their equipment, mostly hand-drawn pumps and wooden ladders, proved utterly useless against napalm. In the days following March 10, Tokyo faced a crisis that exposed the fragility of Japanese preparations. The government had no contingency plans for casualties on this scale. Makeshift morgues were established in schools, temples, and parks. Bodies were stacked in ways that shocked even hardened officials awaiting mass cremation. The psychological impact on survivors proved as devastating as physical destruction. Yoshiko Hashimoto, searching for her mother among thousands of corpses, described scenes that challenged human comprehension. The bodies were all black, shrunken to the size of children. You couldn't tell men from women, adults from children. Some were fused together in embraces, families who died holding each other. The government's response revealed its complete unpreparedness. Emperor Hirohito touring the destroyed areas on March 18 was visibly shaken. His aide Marquito recorded. His Majesty stood silent for a long time, then said, "Tokyo has become a burned field. The capital of the empire has become a burned field." Yet even this devastation failed to immediately change Japanese military strategy. The government ordered increased production of bamboo spears for civilians to repel the anticipated American invasion while suppressing information about the raid's true scale. Newspapers were forbidden to publish casualty figures or photographs of the destruction. The systematic destruction of Japan's cities followed a carefully planned schedule. On March 11, even as Tokyo still burned, 285 B-29s struck Nagoya, center of Japan's aircraft industry. The Mitsubishi engine plant, which produced 40% of Japan's aircraft engines, took direct hits from 1,938 tons of incendiaries. Factory worker Tanaka Hidoshi watched from a hillside as his workplace vanished. The Americans dropped fire in perfect patterns like farmers planting rice. Each bomb created a square of fire, and the squares merged into an ocean of flame. In 20 minutes, factories that took years to build were gone. The campaign's industrial logic was relentless. Osaka, Japan's second-largest city and center of textile production, received 274 B-29s on March 13. The raiders destroyed 8.1 square miles, eliminating 134 war factories. Kobe, the major port and shipbuilding center, lost 7 square miles on March 16, including the Kawasaki submarine yards and aircraft factories. The precision of American target selection revealed an intelligence network the Japanese hadn't imagined. Small workshops hidden in residential areas, unmarked factories in converted schools, even individual homes where families assembled aircraft components, all were systematically destroyed. Post-war investigations revealed that American intelligence, aided by pre-war business records and Japanese-American translators, had mapped Japan's entire industrial infrastructure. By April 1945, the cumulative impact of firebombing was producing what Japanese military psychiatrists termed spiritual collapse among the civilian population. Secret police reports discovered after the war documented increasing defeatism, with citizens openly questioning whether the emperor was divine if he couldn't protect them from American bombs. Lieutenant General Noru Tazoi, responsible for air defense of the homeland, admitted in a post-war interrogation, "After the March raids, I knew we could not win. The Americans could destroy any city at will. We had no defense against night incendiary attacks." The most devastating blow to Japanese morale came from an unexpected source: American leaflets dropped before raids. These warnings, initially dismissed as propaganda, began accurately predicting which cities would be destroyed. The psychological impact of knowing destruction was coming, but being powerless to prevent it, proved crushing. Dr. Masao Maruyama, a political scientist who survived the raids, later wrote, "The leaflets destroyed our concept of death in battle. This wasn't warfare. It was scheduled extermination. The Americans announced they would burn our cities, and then they did exactly that. We were not defeated. We were processed." The statistics of the expanding campaign defied Japanese comprehension. After the initial March fire blitz that destroyed 32 square miles in 10 days, Lamy systematically worked through Japan's urban centers. By May, with major cities largely destroyed, the campaign shifted to secondary targets, 58 cities with populations between 60,000 and 350,000. On May 29, 517 B-29s struck Yokohama in daylight, escorted by 101 P-51 Mustang fighters operating from newly captured Iwo. This raid introduced another psychological blow: American fighters over Japan, something the military had assured citizens was impossible. The presence of escort fighters meant B-29s could bomb in daylight with impunity. The mathematics of destruction accelerated beyond Japanese ability to respond. In May alone, American bombers destroyed 94 square miles of urban area. June saw another 89 square miles incinerated. By July, B-29s were running out of targets, forcing mission planners to revisit cities already burned to destroy rebuilding efforts. The August 1, 1945 raid demonstrated American productive capacity at its peak. 836 B-29s attacked 4 cities simultaneously in the largest raid of the war. Hachioji, a city of 80,000 west of Tokyo, was 80% destroyed in a single night. Toyama, an aluminum production center, suffered 99.5% destruction, the most complete annihilation of any city in the war. Throughout the campaign, individual testimonies revealed the human cost of industrial warfare. Katsumoto Sato, a 12-year-old during the Tokyo raid, dedicated his life to documenting survivor accounts. By 2002, he had collected over 1,000 testimonies, preserving voices that official histories ignored. Haruyo Nihi, 8 years old during the March 10 raid, provided one of the most detailed accounts. Fleeing with her family, she became separated in the chaos. The wind was so strong it lifted people off their feet. I saw a woman with a baby on her back burst into flames. The baby was screaming. Then suddenly both were silent, just black shapes falling to the ground. She survived by chance when her father, whom she didn't recognize in the darkness and chaos, threw himself over her as burning debris fell. They were buried under other bodies which shielded them from the heat. I could hear people above us praying, screaming, then nothing. When we finally crawled out at dawn, we were covered in the melted fat of those who had protected us. The psychological trauma persisted for decades. Shizuyo Takuchi, 14 during the raids, described lasting effects. For years, I couldn't light a match without shaking. The smell of grilled meat made me vomit. Orange sunsets triggered panic attacks. We survived, but we never really left that night. Medical responses to the firebombing revealed the inadequacy of Japanese preparations. Dr. Shigenori Kubota, leading a rescue squad on March 10, documented injuries beyond medical experience. We saw people whose lungs had been seared by superheated air. They were alive but couldn't breathe. Others had been baked alive in shelters when temperatures exceeded 400 degrees. There was nothing in our training to prepare us for this. The handful of hospitals that survived were overwhelmed within hours. Surgical supplies exhausted immediately. Burn treatment facilities designed for dozens of patients received thousands. Medical staff made brutal triage decisions, focusing on those with survivable injuries while leaving severe burn victims to die. Nurse Takahashi Aiko, working at Tokyo Imperial University Hospital, recorded, "We ran out of morphine in the first hour, bandages in the second. By dawn, we were tearing up our own uniforms for dressings. The screaming never stopped. When I finally collapsed from exhaustion 2 days later, I could still hear it in my sleep." The public health crisis extended beyond immediate casualties. With water systems destroyed and bodies decomposing in the ruins, disease outbreaks threatened survivors. Typhoid, dysentery, and respiratory infections spread rapidly through overcrowded refugee centers. The government focused on maintaining military readiness and allocated minimal resources to civilian medical care. Behind the bombing campaign lay an intelligence operation of unprecedented scope. The Joint Target Group in Washington had spent 2 years analyzing Japan's urban infrastructure using pre-war insurance maps, tourist guides, and business directories. They knew the location of every significant factory, the layout of every major city, even the construction materials of different neighborhoods. Japanese-American linguists recruited from internment camps provided crucial intelligence. Sergeant Roy Matsumoto, whose family was imprisoned at Jerome, Arkansas while he served in Burma, later revealed, "We translated captured documents showing where factories had relocated. A diary from a dead soldier might mention his sister working at a hidden aircraft parts shop. Every piece of information went into target folders." The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, had agents reporting from neutral countries, tracking Japanese industrial production through shipping manifests and trade documents. Swedish businessman Vidar Bag, secretly working for American intelligence, provided detailed reports on Japanese synthetic oil production that guided target selection. Most remarkably, American coderickers were reading Japanese military communications throughout the campaign. They knew which cities had functioning air defenses, where night fighters were stationed, even when fuel shortages grounded interceptors. This intelligence allowed Lame to route bombers around defenses and strike when Japanese fighters couldn't respond. Meteorology became a weapon as devastating as napalm itself. American weather officers had discovered they could predict optimal firestorm conditions: low humidity, high winds, and clear skies. They timed raids to coincide with weather patterns that would maximize fire spread. The March 10 Tokyo raid succeeded partly because meteorologists predicted the strong southwestern winds that drove the firestorm. Captain Robert Nelson, chief weather officer for the 21st Bomber Command, later explained, "We knew those winds would turn individual fires into a single conflagration. We literally weaponized the weather." Japanese authorities, lacking sophisticated meteorological services, couldn't predict when conditions favored firestorm formation. They maintained the same civil defense procedures regardless of weather, not understanding that certain conditions made firefighting impossible. The Americans even manipulated weather perceptions. They deliberately conducted nuisance raids during poor weather, forcing Japanese defenders to maintain alerts during storms. Then, when perfect firestorm conditions arose, defenses were exhausted from false alarms. By July 1945, American firebombing had achieved its strategic objective: the complete collapse of Japanese civilian morale and industrial capacity. Secret police reports showed only 32% of civilians believed Japan could achieve anything resembling victory. War production had fallen to 15% of 1944 levels. Over 8.5 million people were homeless, living in makeshift shelters or fleeing to the countryside. The nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while shocking in their novelty, killed fewer people than the firebombing campaign. Hiroshima's death toll of 146,000 and Nagasaki's 80,000 combined were less than the 330,000 to 900,000 killed by conventional bombing. Yet it was the combination, the demonstration that America possessed both unlimited conventional destructive capacity and revolutionary new weapons, that finally convinced Emperor Hirohito to surrender. In his August 15, 1945 surrender broadcast, Hirohito specifically referenced a new and most cruel bomb. But privately, he had been more influenced by the systematic destruction of Japan's cities. According to his aide Marquito's diary, His Majesty said the American firebombing showed they could destroy Japan completely without invading. The atomic bomb simply made the destruction faster. The B-29 campaign represented the largest industrial undertaking in history to that point. The program cost $3 billion, equivalent to $50 billion today, more than the Manhattan Project. Boeing, Bell, Martin, and Fisher built 3,970 B-29s at 4 massive plants, each one containing 55,000 manufactured parts plus 8,000 additional purchased items. Each bomber required 2,000 engineering drawings and 100,000 hours of labor to construct. The Wright R-3350 engines, despite their problems, represented the pinnacle of piston engine technology, 18 cylinders producing 2,200 horsepower each, giving the B-29 a range of 3,250 miles with a 20,000 pounds bomb load. The logistical achievement matched the industrial. Building airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam required moving 11 million cubic yards of earth and coral. North Field on Tinian became the world's largest airport, with 6 8,500-foot runways handling 269 B-29s. Engineers installed 15,000 miles of communications wire and built fuel farms holding 16 million gallons of aviation gasoline. The very existence of this infrastructure in the middle of the Pacific Ocean demonstrated American capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. Admiral Tsutoda later admitted, "We couldn't build a single adequate airfield on islands we had held for decades. The Americans built dozens on islands they had just captured while still fighting." The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki must be understood within the context of the firebombing campaign. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had been substantially destroyed. The nuclear weapons, while revolutionary in their physics, were evolutionary in their strategic impact. Colonel Paul Tibbets, who piloted the Enola Gay, had previously participated in conventional raids. He later observed that the atomic bomb was cleaner, quicker, but not necessarily more destructive than fire raids. "Tokyo on March 10 looked worse than Hiroshima after August 6, he said. The Japanese military's initial response to Hiroshima reveals their numbed acceptance of city-scale destruction. Many leaders assumed it was simply another firebombing until radiation effects became apparent. General Cowibe's first reaction was relief that only one plane was involved, meaning America couldn't have many such weapons. What the atomic bombs provided was efficiency, the destruction of an entire city with a single aircraft rather than hundreds. This efficiency, combined with the radiation effects that killed survivors weeks later, finally convinced Japanese hardliners that continued resistance was futile. The decision to surrender, debated in the Supreme Council for the Direction of the War, was fundamentally shaped by the firebombing campaign. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yanai argued, "The B-29s have already destroyed most of our cities. The atomic bomb simply makes the destruction more efficient. We cannot defend against either." War Minister General Kurichika Anami, the strongest opponent of surrender, had received reports that America had sufficient incendiaries to destroy every city and town in Japan. His intelligence staff calculated that at current production rates, the Americans could maintain the bombing campaign indefinitely. The most influential voice was Prince Fumimaro Kono, who told Emperor Hirohito, "The American bombing has already destroyed Japan's ability to wage war. Continuing means not defeat but annihilation. Every week of delay means another city erased." On August 10, 1945, during the climactic Imperial Conference, Hirohito made his decision. "I cannot bear to see my innocent people suffer any longer. Continuing the war means only that more Japanese blood will be shed." When American occupation forces entered Japan in September 1945, they discovered the true extent of destruction. General Douglas MacArthur's staff found that 40% of Japan's urban area had been destroyed. In the 66 targeted cities, 2.5 million buildings had been razed. Industrial production had fallen to less than 10% of capacity. The human toll became clearer through Japanese records. Official counts listed 330,000 dead from conventional bombing, but municipal records suggested deaths between 500,000 and 900,000. Millions more suffered permanent injuries, burns, respiratory damage from smoke inhalation, and psychological trauma that would last lifetimes. American engineers surveying the damage were shocked by their own success. Colonel John Montgomery, inspecting Tokyo, wrote, "There are areas of 8 to 10 square miles where absolutely nothing remains, not rubble, not foundations, just gray ash. It looks like the surface of the moon." The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted immediately after surrender, concluded that Japan would have surrendered by November 1945 without atomic bombs or invasion, based solely on the conventional bombing campaign and naval blockade. In the decades after the war, survivors of the firebombing organized to preserve their experiences. Katsumoto Sato established the center of the Tokyo raids and war damages in 2002, creating an archive of over 3,000 survivor testimonies. His work revealed stories official histories had ignored. Masako Yamada, who lost her entire family on March 10, 1945, spent 40 years documenting the names of victims in her neighborhood. Her handwritten lists, now preserved in the Tokyo Peace Museum, contain 3,847 names, people whose existence would otherwise be forgotten. Haruyo Nihei, the child who survived under corpses, became a peace educator, speaking to over 100,000 students about her experience. Her message was consistent. War is not statistics or strategies. War is a child watching her mother burn alive and being unable to help. The testimonies reveal permanent psychological damage. Survivors reported lifelong phobias of fire, inability to attend fireworks displays, and panic attacks triggered by air raid sirens used for fire drills. Many never spoke of their experiences until decades later, the trauma too profound for words. The M69 incendiary bomb represented a masterpiece of destructive engineering. Each bomblet contained 2.6 pounds of napalm gel in a 20-inch hexagonal steel pipe. The genius lay in the delivery mechanism: 38 bomblets packed in an E-46 cluster that opened at 2,000 feet, scattering the M69s over a wide area. Upon impact, a 3 to 5 second delay fuse ignited white phosphorus, which shot the napalm gel through the tail of the bomb. The gel, heated to 800 to 1,200 degrees Celsius, sprayed in a 100-foot stream, coating everything it touched. The napalm would burn for 15 to 30 minutes, far longer than conventional incendiaries. Testing at Dugway Proving Ground had perfected the formula. Scientists discovered that adding polystyrene to the napalm created a substance that stuck more effectively to surfaces. They tested different concentrations until achieving the optimal balance between adherence and spread. The cluster bomb pattern was mathematically calculated for maximum coverage. Operations researchers determined that 38 bomblets per cluster, dropped in specific patterns, would create overlapping fire zones that would merge into a general conflagration within 20 minutes. Behind every B-29 raid lay an industrial achievement that dwarfed Japan's entire war production. The Boeing plant in Wichita covered 1.6 million square feet, employing 29,000 workers on 3 shifts. At peak production, they completed one B-29 every 90 minutes. The supply chain stretched across America: engines from Wright Aeronautical in New Jersey, propellers from Hamilton Standard in Connecticut, instruments from Sperry Corporation in New York, gun turrets from General Electric. Each component required its own vast production infrastructure. The aluminum alone told the story of American industrial might. Each B-29 required 60,000 pounds of aluminum. The Alcoa plant in Tennessee, powered by TVA electricity, produced more aluminum in a month than Japan managed in a year. The electricity required for aluminum production exceeded Japan's entire national power generation. The training pipeline matched the industrial effort. By 1945, America was graduating 1,000 B-29 crew members monthly from training bases in Kansas, Nebraska, and New Mexico. Each crew underwent 6 months of training, including 400 hours of flight time before deployment to the Pacific. The firebombing campaign revolutionized strategic bombing doctrine. Previous theories developed by Italian General Giulio de Hette and American General Billy Mitchell had emphasized precision bombing of specific targets. Lame's campaign proved that area destruction could be more effective than precision, particularly against dispersed industry. The campaign validated economist John Kenneth Galbraith's theory of dehousing, that destroying workers' homes was more effective than bombing factories. Workers without shelter, food, or transportation couldn't maintain production even if factories survived. Post-war analysis revealed the campaign's strategic brilliance. By destroying urban areas, the bombing forced Japan to evacuate 8.5 million people to the countryside, creating a refugee crisis that consumed resources needed for war production. transportation systems collapsed under the burden of moving refugees, preventing raw materials from reaching surviving factories. The psychological strategy proved equally sophisticated. By announcing targets in advance through leaflets, the Americans created panic migrations that disrupted production more than the actual bombing. Workers fled threatened cities, abandoning their posts days before raids occurred. General Curtis Lame's decision to switch from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude area bombing represented one of the war's most consequential command decisions. On March 7, 1945, he made the choice unilaterally, not even informing his superior, General Henry Arnold, until after the first raid. Lame later wrote, "I woke up at 2 a.m. with the solution. Strip the guns, fly low at night, carry only incendiaries." It violated everything we'd been taught, but the math was undeniable. We could destroy Japan's cities completely, or we could fail trying to hit specific targets. The personal burden weighed heavily. Lame expected court-martial if the raid failed. He personally briefed every crew, explaining that he was ordering them to fly defenseless into the enemy's capital. "If it doesn't work, send me home in chains," he told his staff. The success vindicated his judgment, but Lame never glorified the decision. In his memoirs, he wrote, "We knew we were going to kill a lot of women and kids. But if the war had continued, millions more would have died in an invasion. It was simple arithmetic, horrible, necessary arithmetic." The firebombing fundamentally altered Japanese culture and society. The concept of mujo, the impermanence of all things, became an enduring spiritual and cultural reflection of that destruction. Impermanence took on new meaning as entire cities vanished overnight. Traditional architecture evolved over centuries proved fatally vulnerable to modern warfare. Post-war urban planning reflected firebombing trauma. Cities were rebuilt with wide boulevards that could serve as firebreaks. Building codes mandated concrete construction. Parks were designed as evacuation areas. Modern Tokyo's layout, with its seemingly random open spaces, directly results from firebombing experience. The Japanese language itself changed. New words entered common usage: napal, dan napal bomb, shurdan, incendiary bomb, higashisha, bombing victim. The phrase Yakin Noira, burned field, became synonymous with total destruction. Literature and cinema grappled with the experience for decades. Novelist Kobo Abe, who witnessed bombing in Manchuria, wrote surrealist works exploring themes of identity loss and urban destruction. Director Akira Kurosawa's post-war films often featured fire as a destructive force reflecting national trauma. The legality of the firebombing campaign remains debated among international law scholars. The 1907 Hague Convention prohibited bombing undefended cities, but Japan's cities contained military targets and air defenses, technically making them legitimate targets. The principle of proportionality, that civilian casualties must not be excessive relative to military advantage, was poorly defined in 1945. American planners argued that destroying dispersed war industry justified area bombing. Critics contended that deliberately creating firestorms to maximize civilian casualties violated laws of war. Robert McNamara, who helped plan the campaign as a statistical analyst, later reflected, "LeMay said if we'd lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals. And I think he's right. We were behaving as war criminals. But what makes it immoral if you lose and not immoral if you win?" The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials established new precedents for war crimes but didn't address Allied bombing. The 1949 Geneva Conventions attempted to clarify protections for civilians, largely in response to World War II's area bombing campaigns. How the firebombing is remembered remains contested between Japan and America. In Japan, the raids are memorialized as victimization, with peace museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and other cities displaying melted artifacts and survivor testimonies. March 10th is observed as Tokyo Peace Day. American memory largely forgot the firebombing, overshadowed by the atomic bomb's dramatic singularity. Military histories emphasize the campaign's strategic success in ending the war without invasion. The moral questions that tormented McNamara rarely enter public discourse. Survivors like Katsumoto Saito fought for recognition, arguing the firebombing's victims deserved the same acknowledgement as atomic bomb survivors. The Japanese government long resisted, not wanting to complicate its victim narrative or anger its American ally. Recent scholarship has attempted balanced assessment. Richard Frank's downfall argues the bombing saved millions of lives by preventing invasion. Mark Selden's The Firebombings of Tokyo and Japan emphasizes the deliberate targeting of civilians. The debate continues without resolution. The firebombing campaign's technological innovations influenced warfare for generations. Napalm, perfected for Japan, became a standard weapon used extensively in Korea and Vietnam. The cluster bomb concept evolved into modern precision-guided munitions. The operational research methods developed to plan raids, statistical analysis, probability calculations, systems optimization, became standard military practice. McNamara later applied these same analytical methods as Secretary of Defense with controversial results in Vietnam. Weather prediction for military operations advanced significantly. The techniques developed to predict firestorm conditions contributed to modern meteorological science. Understanding of fire behavior, urban conflagration patterns, and thermal effects influenced urban planning and fire safety regulations worldwide. The B-29 itself, despite its Pacific War success, quickly became obsolete in the jet age. But the industrial mobilization required to produce it demonstrated American capacity for technological achievement, setting the stage for the aerospace industry and space program. Final casualty figures from the firebombing campaign remain disputed, but documented evidence provides minimum numbers. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey counted 330,000 dead and 476,000 injured from conventional bombing. Japanese government statistics suggested 500,000 dead. Some historians estimate up to 900,000 deaths when including delayed mortality from burns, smoke inhalation, and disease. Beyond deaths, the campaign created 8.5 million refugees, 30% of Japan's urban population. 2.5 million buildings were destroyed. Economic losses exceeded 25% of national wealth. Industrial production fell to 10% of capacity. The psychological toll proved immeasurable. Dr. Masahiro Yamamoto's post-war study of 10,000 survivors found 73% suffered chronic anxiety, 61% reported recurring nightmares, and 44% showed symptoms of what would now be diagnosed as PTSD. These traumas passed to subsequent generations through family dynamics and cultural memory. Medical consequences persisted for decades. Survivors showed elevated rates of respiratory disease from smoke inhalation, chronic pain from burn injuries, and increased cancer incidence possibly related to toxic exposures. The Japanese government provided no comprehensive medical care for firebombing survivors, unlike atomic bomb victims who received special medical benefits. Curtis LeMay never apologized for the firebombing but acknowledged its moral weight. In his autobiography, he wrote, "Every soldier thinks something of the moral aspects of what he is doing, but all war is immoral, and if you let that bother you, you're not a good soldier." His deputy, Brigadier General Thomas Power, was more reflective. "We killed more Japanese civilians in the firebombing than died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. We knew what we were doing. The idea was to kill enough people that Japan would surrender. It worked, but at what cost to our humanity?" Japanese perspectives evolved over decades. Initially, survivors focused on victimization. Later, some acknowledged Japan's aggression had invited retaliation. Sito Katsumoto argued for universal lessons. "The firebombing shows what modern war means, the complete destruction of civilian society. This is why we must never have another war." American airmen who participated showed varying responses. Some maintained the bombing was necessary to end the war. Others struggled with guilt. Tail gunner Joseph Majeski never spoke of his missions until near death. "I saw the fires we set. I knew people were dying down there. Women, kids. You do what you have to in war, but it stays with you." The firebombing of Japan represented the culmination of strategic bombing theory, industrial warfare, and technological innovation. In 9 months, American forces dropped 158,000 tons of bombs, destroying 175 square miles of urban area across 66 cities. The campaign killed more Japanese civilians than 2 years of ground combat in the Pacific. The operation succeeded through meticulous planning, overwhelming industrial capacity, and radical tactical innovation. LeMay's decision to abandon doctrine, stripping defensive weapons, flying at low altitude, doubled bombing effectiveness overnight. The development of napalm created a weapon perfectly suited to Japan's wooden cities. Yet success came through deliberately targeting civilians. The dispersal of Japanese industry provided rationale but not moral justification for burning entire residential districts. The campaign's architects knew they were killing noncombatants en masse and proceeded anyway, calculating that civilian deaths would force surrender. The survivors' testimonies: Haruyo Nihi pulled from under corpses, Yoshiko Hashimoto finding her mother's charred body, Katsumoto Saito running through seas of flame, humanized statistics that numb comprehension. Their accounts preserve the reality of industrial warfare, not abstract strategy, but children watching parents burn alive. Modern Tokyo bears hidden scars of the firebombing. Parks and boulevards mark former fire zones. Memorials list names of neighborhoods that vanished completely. Elderly survivors still flinch at sirens, avoid grilled food, fear orange sunsets. The trauma embedded itself in Japanese culture, shaping post-war pacifism and alliance with former enemies. The strategic success, forcing surrender without invasion, must be weighed against moral costs. The campaign proved area bombing could destroy nations but raised questions about limits in warfare. McNamara's late life admission, "We were behaving as war criminals," reflects unresolved tensions between military necessity and human morality. The firebombing campaign stands as history's most destructive application of conventional weapons against cities. It demonstrated both American industrial might and warfare's descent into calculated massacre. The fires that consumed Japanese cities burned away illusions about modern war's true nature, not conflict between armies, but systematic destruction of entire societies. In the end, Japan never expected American napalm to make rain itself catch fire, to create temperatures that boiled rivers, weather systems that generated cyclonic winds, fires that consumed oxygen from underground shelters. They prepared for conventional war and faced instead the complete erasure of their cities by an enemy whose industrial capacity exceeded comprehension. The legacy remains contentious, the moral questions unanswered. But the voices of survivors, preserved through decades of testimony, ensure the human cost won't be forgotten. As Sayatomi Katsumoto wrote before his death, "I tell these stories not for sympathy, but for warning. This is what war becomes when technology serves destruction. May humanity never again unleash such fires." The numbers tell one story: 330,000 to 900,000 dead, 66 cities destroyed, 8.5 million homeless. The testimonies tell another: children becoming orphans in seconds, families vanishing in flames, entire neighborhoods erased from existence. Together, they document the moment warfare crossed into something new and terrible, the capability to destroy entire civilizations from the air, reducing centuries of culture to ash in a single night. That capability, first demonstrated over Tokyo on March 10, 1945, forever changed warfare's nature and humanity's capacity for destruction. The fires that consumed Japan's cities lit the way to our nuclear age, where entire nations exist one decision away from annihilation. The Japanese witnessed their assumptions destroyed by overwhelming fire, fire that fell like rain, flowed like water, and consumed everything it touched until entire cities simply ceased to exist.